Hello and welcome back to Soul MCA's channel. I am Soul MCA. If today is your first time joining us and watching a video, I ask that you sit through, watch the video. If you like what you see, please give me a like. If you really like what you see and hear, then come and subscribe and join this growing bass community. Today, we have a difficult request from musician 5 Green, and at the time you asked it, you probably thought it was fairly simple what you were asking for, but it's actually very difficult and quite complicated. And that was, you wanted some information on bass amps, what's the best to go for, quality, price. Huge topic that can go down so many avenues. So I'm going to do my best to tackle this subject in the most efficient way possible. So what I'm going to do is this. I think I'm going to cover general things about bass amps, what I've played not as much, and then what I've heard is good. And I wanted to also give you a for sure bass amp to stay away from, but I can't find it and I cannot remember the name. But when we get to that point, I'll talk about that. So here, the thing about bass amps is they're just like strings, they're just like basses, they're just like number of strings on your basses. It's a personal preference thing. By and large, all bass amps are the same, kind of the same. And I say that very loosely, but generally speaking, most things are good, all right? Or you can make them work. Just like I have guys on here all the time that ask, well, why do you use a Rogue bass? Rogue is probably the bottom of the barrel, first bass I bought before I knew anything about bass. Well, you can still make it sound good, at least to some degree, if you know what you're doing with it, or if you tweak it to your own style. So when you're talking about bass amplifiers, we've got to talk about two areas. You've got to talk about combo amps, and you also have to talk about bass amp heads and cabinets. No, not the cabinets in your kitchen. Cabinets being the speakers that come in a box that they call cabinets, and a lot of times they'll come in either 2s, 4s, and they can go higher than that, but generally speaking, you're going to run into either 2, 4, or 1 even. Those 15s, 13s even, you'll run into those. So I'm not going to take a lot of time to talk about combos today. Just know that combos are basically an amplifier and a speaker put together. Your EQ is in the same unit as your speaker. Right? I'm not going to do a lot of talking about combos. I don't have a lot of experience with combos. I haven't played on any combos. I don't, maybe one or two, but I don't spend a lot of time with combos. I spend more time on the amplifier head and cabinet side. So in order to talk about cabinets and amplifier heads, you have to talk about wattage and ohms. There's no way around it. You have to. You can't have the conversation without it. You can talk about combos without getting into that. I mean, sure, you could talk about how much watts it has and blah, 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 but you don't really need it, because what happens with a combo is everything is made for each other. All right, so the amp is not going to blow the speakers. The speakers aren't going to blow the amp, whatever. It's not going to overheat on you, assuming you're using it correctly, because they're built in ratio to each other. But when you separate the two things out, and I'm going to show you an amp head in a second, you now have to talk about compatibility issues, basically. All right, so we've got to talk about wattage and we've got to talk about ohms. Wattages come in different styles, different amounts. You know, you can have anything from like 250 watts up to 2000 watts. A lot of power with that. But with that power, it's got to get harnessed in a way. And when you're talking about harnessing, you're kind of getting into ohms. Ohms is what we call the impedance, or really what's resistance. And I had a good friend, or have a good friend, who used to build speaker boxes and used to talk to me all the time about ohms and impedance. And I'll be honest, I didn't completely listen at the time. And because it didn't matter to me, it had no relevance. I was just like, okay, you're kind of geeky, whatever the case is. But it mattered when I went to buy my first cabinet and speaker amplifier, and I kind of regretted not listening to him. So I've used the analogy previously with gain, and I used the window analogy where I said the gain is like a window on a windy day, right? You have the gain allows things in. So that the more you lift up your gain, or the more you increase your gain, turn it to the right, is the more wind or power you're allowing to come into the bedroom, let's say. The more you decrease it is the more you close that, and that can't come through. I'm going to use that same analogy, a little similar, with watts and ohms. All right, so think about the watts as the wind. All right, the wind is blowing based on how much wattage you have. So if you have like 250, it may not be blowing against your window that hard. If you have 2000, it would be putting more force against that window. Now your ohms is basically how much of that power you let through your window, right? So 8 ohms is a bigger number, but with ohms, the bigger number actually means less that you're letting through, right? So if you go up to 8 ohms, you're letting less power in through that window. You've got it open, let's say, to make this basic, halfway. If you go to, or a quarter of the way, 1/3 of the way. If you go to 4 ohms, you'd be opening yourself up to half to 3/4 of the way. Most bass cabinets now don't go past 4 ohms. If you happen to find one that goes to 2 ohms, your window is basically all the way open, and you're letting all of that wind into the room. So you get a choice a lot of times with 4 ohms and 8 ohms. And when you see wattage for amplifiers, it will read with one or the other. If you don't see anything written, if it doesn't say 4 ohms at this wattage or 8 ohms at that wattage, just assume it's going to be at 4 ohms. I have an amplifier here that I'll pull up in a second that is 4 ohms. And I have another amplifier that actually gives you the choice of 4 or 8. So you got to know what you're getting into. And I found that even though they'll say the wattage is like 1,000, a lot of times it won't come through at 1,000. Now, what happens if you exceed the wattage that your amplifier dispels or pushes out more than your cabinet? Your amplifier is going to overheat, and you could, at worst, blow your bass cabinet, but you can also set your amp on fire. You could cause it not to work anymore. That little fan that's on the inside could stop working, and it'll overheat, much like a computer would or a laptop would if you put something in front of the exhaust fan. And so you don't want to do that. So let's get into some of the stuff that I use, and we'll go from there. All right, so a few more things before I show you this bass amp and get going. Know some things as well. 10-inch speaker size, a lot of people don't know this, dictates how far from that unit you need to be to hear it optimally. So if you have an 8-inch speaker, at 8 inches away from that speaker, you'll hear it best. So if you have a cabinet that's 10 or 15 in size, and you're right next to it, and you're like, I can't hear myself, you're not closest to hear it. The person sitting in the front row or the second row has a better ear for what you're playing than you would right on top of it. So that's something you should always be mindful of when dealing with amplifiers. So I have here a TC Electronics Thrust BQ500. Goes for, let's call it like $250. This is a great amp that I like. It is 4 ohms, very lightweight. I love it because it actually fits in this container that I bring around with all my cords, all my emergency stuff should things go wrong. So it's perfect for me in that regard. Has a speaker out, balanced output, aux in, headphone jack. It's got a 4-band EQ, bass, low, mid, high, mid, treble, master volume, thrust, which is basically like an overdrive. You got a passive active switch, off, on, and a gain. The only thing I don't like about this is that it doesn't have a mute. I've gotten around that both my other amplifier doesn't have a mute either. I've gotten around that by having a cord with a mute built in. I'm not going to go into details about these because I'm not doing product reviews on each of these. But this is a good bass amp. 500 watts is a decent amount. Just know it may not power as much as you think it will. Because remember, depending on your speaker and whether or not it's going at 8 ohms or 4 ohms, you could be letting in all of the power or not as much of the power. The other thing that will dictate that is your volume and your gain will also dictate how much air you're pushing, how much power you're pushing out. So I've noticed with this specific amplifier that it goes red very quickly, red meaning peaking. I put the volume up to a certain amount. I'm like, wow, it's peaking already. And I'm not one to play loud. This is good for medium-sized venue. I'd say probably like 200 people max, 250 depending on the size of the room. Definitely a great practice amp too because you got headphones in. So that is that amplifier there. 250, really great. TC Electronic makes great products. This will last you forever. So I give it a thumbs up if that's something you wanted to do. I play on it personally so I can attest that it is a good product. I'm gonna let you guys hear a little bit of it later. Now this next big boy that I'm about to bring up is not for the faint at heart. It is really heavy. It's actually in a gig carrying case. I've had it for years. I don't even know if they sell it anymore. You probably can find some used ones online. This is a Line 6 bass effects amp. Whew. All right. And this bad boy is actually 750 watts. Whew. This is the first bass amp that I bought, and I figured just get as much watts as you can because the more watts you have, I'll never have to rebuy another amp again in my life. I was naive when I started playing bass, and something you want to avoid because the part that I didn't consider is what speaker is going to drive this. Now, when I first started playing bass, I had a Galeon Cougar 410s, and so that was able to power that relatively easy, and it could take a lot of the payload. But to get lighter, I went down to Markbase cabinet 210s. Light as a feather, love it. Can hold it in one hand with a handle, and then I keep my other amp and a bunch of other cords in another little clear box that I walk around with. Very light. I didn't have to lug those 410s anymore upstairs, downstairs, in and out of the car, whatever the case was. But then that 750 to that little 210s, I mean, even if you're not pushing it a lot, I mean, I could probably go up to 30 or 40% of this amp and still be you just see the cones in the 210s just pushing like, okay, I don't know if they can handle too much more. So that's something to consider. I don't know if they sell it anymore. I'll also let you hear a little bit of this later. And the other amplifier that I want to bring to your attention that no one really thinks about or probably talks about, I've already done a review on it, and you can see my review up here. I'll pin it up here. And that's this interface that I have, the Scarlett Focusrite Scarlett. I think this is a 2i4. A lot of people don't think about it, but it actually makes a great amplifier. Now, you can practice with it personally. I use it to record, but know this. It's not an amplifier on its own. You would have to have it hooked up to a computer. You'd put your bass in the front of it, and then on the back side of it, you would send it as an out to an actual cabinet. But you would have to get your power from a laptop. And then inside the laptop, you would have to have a program like an Ableton or something else that you can put various bass effects on or bass EQ in, and you could digitally enhance your sound that way and choose your sound that way. Something a lot of people don't think about. I've seen some guys do it live. I've witnessed it live, and it's pretty creative. If you're okay with having your laptop on stage and you want to just do some things on the fly, very light, very smart way of traveling, that is an option for you as well. All right, so now I want to talk to you about some bass amplifiers that I've played that I don't own. I don't play on regularly, but I've played them and can give kind of a quick and dirty assessment of them and what they do. The first being the Trace Elliott Elf, very small speaker or amplifier you could literally put in your back pocket, and doesn't have all that much wattage, but it's very powerful for its size. I would say you could push a venue probably a 50 to maybe 100. It's going to be bucking it, but you could do it. Very good amp, and I like it that you could just stick it in your laptop bag and go, or stick it in your gig bag and go. So those, if you're looking for something small, would be good for you. Markbase Tube 800 watts. And sorry, the Trace Elliott is $300, give or take. The Markbase Tube 800, 800 watts. Great amplifier as well, and what I really like about it is it has a mute. You pull out the volume and it mutes everything that's going in, which is a very nice touch. Markbase makes excellent products. They're light, they're powerful for their size. Absolutely love them. Problem is it runs about $700. It can be a little bit more on the pricey end, but the sound you get even from that tube, if you like lows, nice warm lows, that is a great investment for you as well. Then you have the Bugeraveyron. I wanted one of these so bad, and it comes in two different styles, the MOSFET and the tube. The MOSFET is more modern, I guess you could say, a little brighter. The tube obviously gives you a little lower, rounder, warmer sound. I wanted one of these so bad because they're 2,000 watts, and I thought, okay, the thing is like this big, 2,000 watts, I'll be golden. I'm at a gig, and a guy comes in with one. I've got 410 speakers. Actually, I've got my 210 speakers. I had to go and get my 410 speakers because he's like, I'm gonna blow your 210s. And I'm like, no, I got 750 watt. He's like, no, I'm gonna blow your speakers. So we ended up actually using the 410s and the 210s just to cut down on some of the wattage. And even then I was just watching my cones when he was playing, just boo, 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 boo. So it's a lot of power. Fortunately, they make a cabinet strictly for this. So the downside is if you get this amplifier head, you should probably get the cabinet as well. And it runs $600 just for the amp head. Great sound, nice and small, but you literally need to be walking around with some big boy speakers, or to be walking around with the actual cabinet that can match the wattage that puts out. Lastly, I want to talk about the Behringer BX2000, another one that puts out 2,000 watts. It's only $300, and this amp doesn't really look much like a bass amp, but a student of mine has one, and it is amazing. The quality, the tone that you get, you could easily blow up your speaker, I'll warn you, but it just gives you so many options. Bright tone, deeper bass. There's just so many options that it gives you, and it sounds phenomenal. So the last section I want to get into is just other things I've heard that are really good. I've heard that and these are actually combos. The Fender Rumble goes for about $600. I've heard that that's really good. Solid, gives you some good, nice tone. It has a direct out. And the thing I want to talk about all of these speakers, you want to look for a direct out, because a direct out can help you make your speaker just your own personal monitor, and then let the sound system do all the work for you. Let the sound system push heavy so that you don't have to be using your amp to be blowing anything away. And then again, stand as far away as the size of your speaker is to get the optimal sound from it, or even put it up too. You can put it on something or tilt it to help it get to your ears more easily if you're standing or if you're sitting. And then any Markbase combo is great. Just honestly, anything that Markbase sells to me is gold. It's a little pricier, but again, like I said, it's lightweight and it's durable. I've had my Markbase stuff forever. I have pushed my Markbase. I've lent out my stuff to people that I know don't think as much as me maybe about protecting it, and it can handle it. I still have used this 750 watt on it and kind of pushed it to its limit. And like I said, the cones go, but it's never blown up on me. Not a wise thing to do, and definitely not for long periods of time, but it can handle just about anything you throw it at. I wish that I could have remembered this, and I don't want to call any company's name because I don't want to say it and it not be correct, but there is a company that surprised me a bit. I bought a head from them, and within 24 hours, as a matter of fact, as soon as I got home, I said, I've got to return it. And the only reason I didn't was because Guitar Center was closed. But the first thing the next morning, that sucker was gone. Bye. Going back, it didn't work. The fan kept shutting off. And I thought maybe it was just a dysfunction with that particular unit. But when I started to do research afterwards, which wasn't wise, I discovered that it's a fault with that particular brand of that particular line's that's how I'll say it, amplifiers. So always do your research before you go. Like I said, nowadays, just about anything is good. Usually people give you honest reviews. Just look for the reviews, see what's up. Think about your church size or wherever your gigs are. Think about the size and buy an amp accordingly, but also scale up a little bit, because as you get better, you never know who you'll be playing for, and you might need a rig to go with you on bigger stages. So you want to get what you need for your room, and then maybe go a little bit more than that, just in case you have to play at an outdoor venue or people start to call your number. You want to have everything in place. So the only other thing I'm going to do for you now is I'm going to play a little bit for you, just a little bit. I'll play on my interface. I'm going to play it straight. I'm not going to add any effects or anything in any kind of program software, just so you can hear the difference when I switch to going to an amplifier, still running the amplifier back through the interface, and then when I switch to the very last, the big boy, and run that through the interface as well. And maybe I'll throw on an effect or two if it can handle it and not blow it. So let's get to those. All right, so first up is our interface, then we'll jump to our TC, then we'll jump to our line 6. Just really quickly, I'm just going to play a little bit of They That Wait, the last tutorial I did by Fred Hammond. If you haven't seen it yet, you can see it there. Learn the song yourself. Great song, great for building dexterity. And the only thing I'm going to adjust, I'm not going to adjust my bass at all. I'll just adjust the volume, because when I go to the amps, it's going to be much too loud for the interface. So one thing I failed to say, the higher you go up in wattage with these amps, and I was afraid it was going to happen when I plugged in the 750, the line 6, it pulls on a lot of power. And sometimes you can't just plug into those rinky-dink surge protectors and expect to get power. With this thing, if it's not getting enough power, it won't even turn on. Or it'll turn on and then it'll start to blink a little bit and just turn off. Sometimes you have to go straight into the wall, or you've got to have a really powerful surge protector to ensure you're getting enough power. So just be mindful of that also if you're looking to buy some kind of bass amp with more wattage. I'm Soul MCA. Hope you enjoyed this video. Y'all take it easy. God bless. Peace.